Behind the craziest comedy of 1994 was a cast full of tragedy, depression, addiction, and self-destruction, lawsuits, escapes from Hollywood just to save themselves. And one of them even ended up with a final chapter more tragic than anybody ever imagined. In 1994, The Mask was not just a hit, it was a real phenomenon. Jim Carrey was a comedy genius then. Cameron Diaz was the face a whole generation of male viewers could not take their eyes off of. And around them was a cast America knew very well at the time. But the funnier the movie was, the crueler reality became. So after 32 years, what really happened to the cast of The Mask? Let's look back at them today. And at the end of the video, I am saving 5 of the most interesting behind-the-scenes stories about the movie itself, the part hardcore The Mask fans are definitely going to love. Number 1, Jim Carrey as Stanley Ipkiss / The Mask. Let's start with the man I believe a whole lot of American men from the 90s, me included, once looked up to. Jim Carrey played Stanley Ipkiss, the lead in The Mask. That year he was 32. This year he is 64. And what really matters is that this movie came right in the biggest breakout year of his life. In 1994 alone, Carrey had Ace Ventura, The Mask, then Dumb and Dumber, and he went straight from an up-and-coming comedy face to a box office phenomenon. But what makes Jim Carrey memorable is not just how fast he rose, it is where he rose from. Carrey left school in 1978 to help support his family, then worked as a janitor in a factory for 2 years. His younger years also include that rough stretch when his family fell into such deep poverty. They ended up living in a van and in tents after his father lost his job. One of the heaviest burdens in Jim's life came from his mother being sick for a long time. A lot of stories later on said Carrey would do all kinds of things just to make his mother laugh inside a house full of pressure and exhaustion. I think that is a really important piece. It explains why the energy the whole country used to see in him always felt so intense and so desperate at the same time. Then, once he got famous, the darkness did not go away. Carrey has spoken openly about depression and about using antidepressants for a long stretch before stopping. That is the part that makes people look back at him differently. The man who made the whole world laugh was also struggling through some very heavy stretches in his own mind. The biggest public personal crisis of his life was the Catheriona White case. After Carrey's former girlfriend died in 2015, her husband and mother sued him for wrongful death. Carrey strongly denied the allegations, and in January 2018, the lawsuit was dismissed. That was the biggest cloud that hung over his name for years. In recent years, Carrey has slowed down and shown up less, but the second he appears, the public still pays attention right away. Early in 2026, he received an honorary César Award in France, a very clear reminder that even though Hollywood has changed, Jim Carrey's shadow still carries real weight. And if Jim Carrey was the soul of this movie, then the next person is the leading lady. A whole lot of men back then could not stop staring at Cameron Diaz as Tina Carlyle. Number 2, Cameron Diaz as Tina Carlyle. Now we get to the woman a whole lot of American men in the 90s were crazy about. Cameron Diaz played Tina Carlyle, the female lead in The Mask. When the movie came out, she was 22. This year she is 54. And what stands out is that this was not just her first big role on the big screen. This was the breakout that turned her into a star almost overnight. But if all you remember about Cameron Diaz is that glowing blonde girl from The Mask, that is still only half the story. The other half is the price of being boxed in as a beauty symbol. Later on, Diaz herself said pretty openly that she got pulled into Hollywood's machine of objectifying women and obsessing over appearance. She tried Botox, then regretted it because she felt like her face had become so unfamiliar. She would rather grow old than live with a face that no longer felt like her own. Behind the image men back then were obsessed with was a woman carrying the pressure of beauty. Pretty bitter, honestly. Cameron Diaz's personal life was not the loud kind, but that does not mean it was free of sadness. One of her biggest losses was the sudden death of her father, Emilio Diaz, in 2008 from severe pneumonia. On top of that, her family had already gone through tragedy very early on when one of her cousins died from AIDS back in the early 1980s. The biggest turning point in Cameron Diaz's life came later, and it was not a scandal. It was her decision to walk away from Hollywood for nearly a decade. Diaz said she needed to take control of her life back because for years, the star machine had been managing almost every part of it. That is a very real kind of burnout. She married Benji Madden, became a mother, focused on her family, and started living at a totally different pace. And what matters is that she did not disappear because her time was up. She left because she wanted to hold on to who she really was. And when Cameron Diaz came back to the screen, she came back as a completely different woman from that 22-year-old girl in The Mask. Calmer, more in control, and obviously a whole lot clearer on what she wanted. What makes Cameron Diaz memorable is not just how stunning she once was. It is the fact that years later, people finally realized that behind that face was a woman who had to step out of the Hollywood machine. As somebody who always liked her, I am honestly glad she got control of her life before she crashed all the way down like so many other stars did. Number 3, Peter Greene as Dorian Tyrell. If there is one person in this cast whose life really fits the word tragedy, it is Peter Greene. In The Mask, he played Dorian Tyrell, the main villain of the movie. That year, he was 35. Peter Greene was born in 1959. Peter Greene ran away from home when he was 15. His early life did not have a stable foundation, did not have the kind of clean path a lot of other actors had. He dropped out of school, lived a shaky life in New York, worked a bunch of odd jobs just to survive, and got pulled pretty early into an environment full of drugs and the crime that came with it. For somebody like that, movies were almost not the starting point. It was more like a turn that came very late after life had already left way too many scratches on him. The biggest tragedy in Peter Greene's life was his long battle with heroin and cocaine through the whole 90s. And that was also the exact stretch when his career should have been flying the highest. Along with The Mask, Greene also showed up in Pulp Fiction, The Usual Suspects, and a bunch of movies that made people believe he could absolutely have become one of Hollywood's top villain faces. But his private life did not let him hold on to that momentum for long. In 1996, he tried to take his own life, then later went into rehab. By 2007, he was arrested again for possessing crack cocaine. Those 2 moments alone show pretty clearly that his fight never really ended. What makes this story heavier is that Peter Greene was not lacking talent. There was a point when he stood very close to a much bigger place in the business, but addiction, mental instability, and personal crashes broke that road apart before it could get where it was going. Then, at the end of 2025, Peter Greene was found dead in his Manhattan apartment. A few months later, officials ruled the cause of death was a gunshot wound and determined it was accidental. Even his ending left the exact same feeling his whole life always carried: uneasy, heavy, and really sad. Number 4, Peter Riegert as Lieutenant Mitch Kellaway. Peter Riegert is the kind of actor longtime American movie fans always save a very specific kind of respect for. He played Lieutenant Mitch Kellaway in The Mask at 47. This year, he is 79, and what I like about Peter Riegert is that he never needed to be loud for people to remember him. He belongs to that type of actor who works through steadiness, durability, and a very grounded presence that Hollywood really does not have much of anymore. Unlike some of the more troubled names on this list, Peter Riegert has almost no scandal-filled private life for people to gossip about. His public record is pretty clean. No giant collapse, no years of loud downward spirals, and Riegert did not come into the business like some young star who exploded overnight either. He grew up in New York, finished college, then only after that really settled into acting. Before that, he had worked as a teacher, a waiter, and a social worker. I've always liked actors who come up that way. It makes it feel like they got to the job after living enough life to understand people. Maybe that is why Peter Riegert has always had something that feels very real, very seasoned, very trustworthy. What is even more admirable is that he did not just act. Peter Riegert also wrote and directed, including By Career, the short film that got an Oscar nomination. Looking at him now, I do not see some sensational story. I see a man who made it through multiple eras of Hollywood without losing his professional dignity. And after a face as steady as that, the next story gets a whole lot sadder. Amy Yasbeck as Peggy Brandt. Number 5, Amy Yasbeck as Peggy Brandt. Amy Yasbeck is one of those faces that gets sadder the more you look back, because her life turned out to be way more painful than the mischievous mood of The Mask would ever make you think. In 1994, when the movie came out, she was 32. This year, she is 64. In the movie, she played Peggy Brandt. But the thing that leaves the heaviest feeling around Amy Yasbeck is not that role. It is the tragedy that split her life in two later on. Amy Yasbeck married John Ritter, one of the most beloved faces in American television. Then in 2003, Ritter died suddenly at 54. At first, he was treated as if he were having a heart attack, but later they found that the real cause was an aortic dissection. That was the biggest shock of Amy Yasbeck's life, and it is also the most important detail if you want to understand why the later part of her life went in a completely different direction. That pain did not stop at the funeral. After her husband's death, Amy Yasbeck and the family went into a wrongful death lawsuit that lasted for years against the doctors and hospital involved. The family believed that if he had been diagnosed correctly from the start, John Ritter might have been saved. There were multi-million-dollar settlements out of court, but by 2008, the jury still found that the two main doctors were not at fault. That is what makes this story even sadder. She did not just lose her husband. She also had to spend years living inside a legal fight that ended without bringing her the thing she wanted most. What I truly respect about Amy Yasbeck is that she did not let that loss stop as private pain. Later on, she became deeply tied to the John Ritter Foundation for Aortic Health, spending years raising awareness about aortic dissection and heart health. Which means she turned the biggest tragedy of her life into something useful for other people. To me, that is the most admirable part of her story. And if Amy Yasbeck is the story of a woman learning how to keep living after tragedy, then the next person is a comedy face whose real life ended up being much sadder, Riegert Jeni as Charlie Schumaker. Number 6, Riegert Jeni as Charlie Schumaker. Some people show up on screen to make everybody else laugh, and only later do we realize their lives were much sadder than we ever thought. In The Mask, Riegert played Charlie Schumaker, Stanley Ipkiss's best friend. That year, he was 37. What a lot of people forget is that Jeni was not just some supporting actor who happened to pass through this movie. He was a real name in American stand-up comedy with multiple specials on Showtime and HBO, his own sitcom called Platypus Man, and by 2004, Comedy Central had ranked him 57 on its list of the 100 greatest stand-up comedians of all time. Riegert Jeni was not somebody people forgot for years and then suddenly dug back up. He had a real position, a real audience, a real place in American comedy. He grew up in Brooklyn, graduated from Hunter College with a degree in comparative politics, worked in public relations before moving fully into stand-up in 1982. That path shows he did not come into the business like some lucky outsider. He was smart, skilled, and genuinely talented. After Riegert Jeni died, his family confirmed he had been diagnosed with major clinical depression, along with episodes of paranoia. Hollywood Reporter noted that the family clearly said his death was a suicide, and the coroner's report said he had previously been hospitalized against his will after falling into a depressive state with suicidal intent. And then on March 10, 2007, Riegert Jeni died at his home in Los Angeles. The cause involved a gun bringing the life of a gifted performer to an end after he was swallowed up by depression, paranoia, and a kind of despair people on the outside only saw when it was already too late. Number 7, Orestes Matacena as Niko. Not everybody in this cast had a life full of breakdowns. Some people managed to stay on their path for a very long time, steady and solid, and Orestes Matacena is one of those cases. In The Mask, he played Niko at 53. This year, he is 85. Matacena was born in Havana, Cuba, then came to America and built a career in an industry that was never easy for Latino actors of his generation. That journey alone already tells you he was not the kind of man who got ahead on luck. What stands out about Orestes Matacena is not scandal or public tragedy. Looking back at his personal life, there were almost no major collapses, no loud scandals, no long years of falling apart like so many other people on this list. Matacena's career is also a lot longer than people remember. He had been working since the early 70s, moving through theater, film, and television, and he also wrote, produced, and directed. He was not just a familiar supporting face in The Mask, he was the kind of man who stayed deeply tied to the craft for a very long time. There is one pretty great detail about him too. He built his very first stage right in the living room of his apartment in Miami. I love that detail because it says everything about who this man was. He did not stand outside the work. He lived inside it. Matacena's personal life has also stayed pretty private. He was married to Clara Hernandez from 1975 to 1982, and outside of a few brief notes about later relationships, there has been almost nothing loud for the press to chase. And after a man who stayed almost completely away from public noise, like Orestes Matacena. The next person is somebody who seemed gentle on screen but stirred up plenty of controversy in real life. Ben Stein as Dr. Arthur Neuman. Number 8. Ben Stein as Dr. Arthur Neuman. Ben Stein played Dr. Arthur Neuman in The Mask. That year he was 50. This year he is 82. What makes Ben Stein very different from the rest of this cast is that he did not come to the screen through the usual Hollywood path. He graduated from Columbia, was valedictorian at Yale Law, worked as a lawyer, taught as a professor, then served as a speechwriter for Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, before becoming a familiar face in American film and television. So if all you remember is Ben Stein as that slow-talking guy with glasses on screen, that is still not enough. In real life, he is a public figure with very strong opinions, and for years he stirred up a lot of controversy. The biggest turning point tied to Ben Stein was Expelled No Intelligence Allowed in 2008, a film he appeared in and co-wrote. That project attacked evolution and pushed intelligent design, so it got hit with major backlash from the scientific community. From that point on, Ben Stein was no longer just a familiar pop culture face. He became a name tied to academic and political controversy. Then, in 2014, he triggered another wave of backlash when he called Barack Obama the most racist president in American history. That comment was widely criticized and made Ben Stein's image even more divisive. Before that, he had also sued a company and an ad agency after being removed from a media campaign, arguing that it had to do with his public views on climate change. In other words, with Ben Stein, the things he said off screen did not just make noise in the press. It directly affected his work too. And still, his personal life has been a whole lot steadier. He married Alexandra Denman, got divorced, then married her again, and the two of them have an adopted son. Hard to believe, honestly. Number 9. Tim Bagley as Irv in The Mask. Bagley played Irv at 37. This year he is 69, and he himself once said this was the first movie where he really had a real part to play. That detail alone tells you The Mask was not just some small stop for him. It was a real career milestone. The most important thing in Tim Bagley's life is not some scandal or flashy tragedy. It is the fact that he was openly gay during a time when that alone could make the doors of the business slam shut in your face. Bagley has said pretty openly that when he was younger, he tried all kinds of ways not to be gay, including conversion therapy and other forms of treatment. Just hearing that much already tells you the hardest part of his life was not making headlines. It was a deeply private war with who he was. And the career price of that honesty was brutal. In 2025, Bagley said that back in the late 80s when he was at the Groundlings, he was not sent out to audition for Saturday Night Live because he was openly gay and he believed they did not want to hire somebody like that. That is the kind of reality today's audiences can forget too easily. There was a time when just living honestly could cost an actor the biggest opportunity of his life. But the thing I respect about Bagley is that he says he has no regrets. So Tim Bagley's career did not go the explosive route, it went the steady route. He became one of those familiar faces on American television, showing up everywhere from Will and Grace to Monk Grace and Frankie and later, Somebody Somewhere. In recent years, Bagley has finally started getting seen more clearly, like a longtime face finally receiving the recognition he deserved. And the last name on this list is somebody who only appeared briefly in The Mask, but later earned deep respect from American television audiences, Reg E. Cathey as Freeze. Number 10, Reg E. Cathey as Freeze. The last name on this list only appears briefly in The Mask, but later became one of the most respected faces on American television. Reg E. Cathey played Freeze at 36. Cathey came from a very strong background. He was born in Huntsville, Alabama. His father was an Army colonel who served in World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Cathey spent a lot of his childhood in West Germany before returning to Alabama as a teenager. After that, he studied theater, seriously earned a BFA from the University of Michigan, then went on for an MFA at the Yale School of Drama. Reg E. Cathey's career was the kind that moved slowly but rose in a very steady way. He worked for years through supporting parts, then gradually became a face American television audiences deeply respected because of The Wire and especially House of Cards. His role as Freddie Hayes in House of Cards brought him 3 straight Emmy nominations and a win in 2015 for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series. That detail matters a lot because it shows he was not just durable. He reached a real peak, and he did it fairly late in life. What made Reg E. Cathey so respected was his professionalism, that unforgettable voice, his calm presence, and his ability to elevate even small roles. The saddest part of this story is that he died on February 9, 2018, at his home in New York, from lung cancer. He was only 59, right at the moment when audiences had come to hold him in very high regard. So that takes us through the whole cast. But with a movie like The Mask, looking at the actors alone still is not enough. The fun for people like us who love old movies is that by the end, we still want to sit around a little longer just to swap a few behind-the-scenes stories that are actually worth remembering. The first one is this. Chuck Russell once said that after Jim Carrey got cast, the production saved a whole lot of money on special effects. At first, that sounds like an exaggeration, but when you look back at the movie, you realize he was absolutely right. Jim Carrey's body already had that stretchiness, that cartoon rhythm, and that wild facial flexibility other people would have needed visual effects to create. Put simply, there are times when the biggest special effect in The Mask is Jim Carrey himself. Then there is the money story, and honestly, this is always the kind of Hollywood story worth hearing. Jim Carrey only got $450,000 for The Mask. That was an unbelievable bargain for New Line Cinema, because the deal was signed before Ace Ventura: Pet Detective exploded. Not long after that, even before The Mask came out, Carrey signed a deal for $7 million to do Dumb and Dumber. And if you need one number to show how important The Mask was for Carrey, this is the one. It was the first movie in a run of more than 10 films of his to pass $100 million at the domestic box office. Which means this was the point where Jim Carrey stopped being just some unusual comedy guy. He became a real box office star, and Cameron Diaz has a story that still sounds hard to believe every time you hear it. She had to audition 12 times before she won Tina Carlyle, and she was only officially cast 7 days before filming started. Just thinking about that is enough to remind you that sometimes one last-minute decision can change the movie memory of a whole generation, and the last fact might be the nicest one of all. Peter Riegert and Peter Greene became close friends during filming, then kept that friendship going for many years after, all the way until Peter Greene died in 2025. After all the performances, the laughter, the chaos on screen, sometimes what remains is something very real between people off screen. The Mask was never just a hit comedy from 1994. It was a movie with way too much personality to forget, way too bold, way too alive, and full of exactly the kind of energy Hollywood back then used to do so well. The more I look back on it after 32 years, the more I feel like what makes this movie memorable is not just the laughter, not just the crazy scenes, but the people behind it. Some people exploded and then had to live with the darkness. Some walked away from fame just to save their own lives. Some went through losses so huge that everything after that changed, and some just stayed quietly steady, outlasting their own era on screen. Maybe that is why The Mask is still here. It is tied to a time when Hollywood was willing to make movies that were big fun and genuinely weird. And for you, out of these 10 names today, who surprised you the most,